Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. As most of you know, I'm a big fan of Westerns. And one of my favorite Western TV actors we're very privileged to have on the show now, Robert Fuller. Robert, welcome to Connor's Corner.
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it.
Now, some of the younger people, they're not going to remember you maybe, but, you're on TV now all the time. Laramie's on.
Yeah, all the show. Laramie, Wagon, Train, and Emergency are rerunning all over the country and have been for about the last 4 years. It's been pretty incredible, yeah.
Yeah, because did you ever think that when you were making some of these shows 50, 60 years ago, people would be watching them in, 2019?
Absolutely not. Had no idea whatsoever that it would be like this. I've got fans now that are 10 and 11 years old that I get fan mail from, and lots of teenagers that have been watching that show now, Laramie particularly.
Now, I guess a lot of us first noticed you in Laramie, so how did that show come about?
Well, it was my first series. I'd been in the business for quite a while. I started out working as an extra, and then, of course, I was interrupted the service in the Army for a couple of years. And when I got back out of the Army, I started studying acting with Richard Boone in 1955. And I got pretty lucky. I started working as an actor in early 56, lots in 57, a lot in 58. And by late 58, I was getting some pretty nice guest star roles on several different television series. And Universal came up with I'd done a lot of shows for Universal. They came up with a new series called Laramie, and that's how it came about. And I did it. And as I said, it was my first series, so you could call it a breakthrough, that's for sure, because that's when you come into everybody's home once a week, and they get to know you pretty good.
Yeah, and now that you can see Laramie on the Western Channel, Monday through Friday?
You bet, 4, 5, 6 times.
Okay. What was the dynamics of the show? Who was in the cast with you?
Well, John Smith, of course, played Slim, who ran the stage stop. Bobby Crawford Jr. Played his little brother. And this is the very first season. And then Hoagie Carmichael was the ranch hand. And I was a loner who inadvertently, I guess, trespassed on his property. And we have a little set to together about it. And then I wind up at his ranch while he's not there to water my horse or something, and I meet the kid, Bobby, who I guess at that time was probably around maybe 11, 12 or something like that. And I'm sort of an ex-gunfighter, good guy, but, got a shady past, but I'm still a good guy. And he takes a liking to me, and it winds up that I stay on and help run the ranch. And for four seasons, 136 shows or something. That's the way it went.
Now, why do you think it's enduring? Why are people watching the show today?
Oh, well, Laramie, and I'm not just saying this, it's undoubtedly one of the best Westerns TV series ever made. We had the best writers, the best directors. My cameraman alone was Ray Ranahan, who invented Technicolor. He was the Technicolor consultant on Gone with the Wind. My special effects man, Frank Brindell, won the Academy Award for Earthquake. So I was surrounded by great talent, great Les Sealander, Joe Kane. These are directors that directed Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and Tom Mix. And these were old men when they were directing us, but they sure knew how to direct a Western. And great writers. So in those days, we had all that. Couldn't do it today.
You had good guest stars, too.
We had the best. If you say, do you watch that show?
Yes. I watched it back then.
You've seen so many actors who have gone on to become big movie stars. Charlie Bronson, I could name a ton of them. It's amazing how television in those days kicked off a lot of people, including my series Emergency. I mean, you look at it, you're going to see people like John Travolta, I could go on, with one-liners who became huge stars.
Let's talk about Emergency for a minute. Again, except for some of us older folks, a lot of people are not going to remember who Jack Webb was. Do you want to tell them and how you met Jack Webb?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know how many people cannot know Jack Webb. I mean, Dragnet probably plays more on television, along with The Lone Ranger, than any other two TV series ever. Jack Webb, of course, a dynamic personality, should have won the Academy Award for a great movie he did called The D.I., where he played a Marine drill instructor. He was also a very, very good actor and a good producer. He had probably, when I started Emergency with him, I think he had 5 television shows going, so he knew his business. I had never met Jack before, but I certainly had admired his work and had watched him throughout the years. And my agent, this is after Wagon Train now. I'd already done Laramie, I'd done Wagon Train, I'd done movies, and I was dying to do another Western series, but they were almost gone. There was no chance of any more Western series coming on. But I was hanging around wanting to do one, and my agent called me and said, Jack Webb is interested in you doing the lead in a new TV series that he has. And I said, really? I said, what's the name of it? And he said, Emergency. And I said, well, that sounds like a medical series. And he said, well, it is. And I said, well, I don't want to do a medical series. I want to do another Western. And my agent said, are you nuts? There's not going to be another Western on the horizon, period. And you don't understand. Jack Webb doesn't want to interview you. He wants you and nobody else in Hollywood to play Dr. Brackett on his new medical series about the paramedics. I'd never heard of paramedics before. I think we only had 3 or 4 in the whole United States in 1970. So I said, well, I still don't want to do it, but I owe the man the courtesy to go in and tell him I don't want to do his medical series. So he said, well, they're expecting you after hours in his office tomorrow night at Universal Studios. So I said, all right, I'll be there 7 o'clock. And I put a suit and tie on and showed up at his office and was ushered into a huge, huge office full of all the NBC and Universal brass, and Jack behind his desk. A big, beautiful bar set up in there. Everybody's sitting around having cocktails. And I walked up to Jack's desk and I said, Mr. Webb, it's a pleasure meeting you. And enjoyed your work throughout the years. But I really want to tell you from the start here, I am not interested in doing a medical series. Jack looks up at me and says, shut up and sit down. Just like that. It took me back a little bit, He said, do you drink? And I said, yeah. He says, go fix yourself a drink and come back here and sit down. Jack Webb. So I went over and I poured a big vodka. And I came back and I sat down and I walked out of that office 2 hours later with 12 pages of a 2-hour world premiere movie to be shot with 13 one-hour episodes to follow, sold, of a series called Emergency. So I was pretty lucky.
You wanted to do a Western, but Westerns were dying out then. Do you know why?
Well, there's several reasons. Probably the really main reason, if you really want to put the blame on somebody, would be the PTA, Parent Teachers Association. They didn't like the idea that we wore gun belts and guns, and they felt Westerns were too violent. So they went to Teddy Kennedy, Senator Kennedy at that time, who in turn went to the FCC, and they all came down on Westerns, including in the beginning of Laramie, as a matter of fact. We would get, when you do a series like that back in those days, there's several rewrites before the show actually starts to be filmed. First, your script would be in white pages, and then the revisions would be yellow, and more revisions would be blue, and then you could get green. It's just rewriting a week to 2 weeks before you start filming. Well, for the first 2 to, say, 3 years of Laramie, I killed at least 5 guys a show, beat the heck out of 10. without a doubt, not violent, for a meeting. You've watched the show, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Well, toward the end of the third year and going into the fourth, every time we would get those revisions coming down from NBC and the FCC, I could only shoot 2 guys, wound 1, and only have 1 fight. And that went for every Western, including the Virginian that was shooting that time on the lot. No, there were 32 Westerns in prime time in 1959, 60, 61, 62. 32 in prime time, and every one of them were affected. Then on Wagon Train, when I went on to Wagon Train, the Indians, Indian Nation, got up in arms about us killing Indians. How do you do a wagon train and cross country without getting involved with the Indians? So all that action got cut down, and that ended that show. So that's what happened, really, toward the demise of Westerns. They just got uninteresting.
But at the same time, movies started to get more and more violent.
Oh, but 10 times more. I mean, look at Clint, look at his movies. But see, that's movies. That's not television. Television was run by the networks and the FCC. It had nothing to do with motion pictures.
You acted in more than a few motion pictures. What was the difference to you between acting, let's say, in a theatrical film and a TV series?
Well, just more time, more rehearsal time. We would shoot Laramie in 5 days. That's 120 pages shot in 5 days, 12 hours a day, without missing a beat, and that's tough. And that's a 1-hour show. So you do a movie that's an hour and a half or close to 2 hours. You could take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. So you're only doing a couple scenes a day. You got all that leisure and all that rehearsal time to make them good, and it's a whole different ball game.
We skipped over Wagon Train a little bit. How'd you get the part in Wagon Train? Robert Horton was the scout before you.
No, Denny Miller was.
Denny Miller? Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, no. Robert Horton left the show way before I came on it, 2 or 3 years before. And then Scott Miller, his name was Denny, but they changed it to Scott Miller. He came on, and he was the scout. And but when Laramie ended in 63 or 64, I'm not sure which it was, the studio immediately came to me and said, how would you like to go right into Wagon Train as the scout? And, of course, I jumped on it because it was a Western. Secondly, because it starred John McIntyre at this time, who was a very good friend of mine and had done several Laramies. Frank McGrath and Terry Wilson, Hawks and Wooster, were good friends of mine, ex-stuntmen, actors today. And I knew Denny Miller. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to. And it was going to be expanded to an hour and a half in color. And they made me a very nice offer, and I got to do another Western. So that's how I walked right into that.
And why did you like making Westerns? What was your attraction to it?
Well, I guess I could wear my boots to work and wear them home. I've always liked the West. I ride horses. I have a ranch now with horses, and I lived the Western life in California pretty much. Rode all the time, amateur rodeo stuff. Just my best friend was Chuck Courtney, who played Dan Reed on the Lone Ranger on the Lone Ranger series, and he and I ran around together having a great time. He had horses, so I was always riding there, and almost, well, like I said, there was 32 Westerns in prime time. Well, I did almost all of them as small parts and guest parts and larger parts before Laramie. So I was pretty well geared to do Westerns. I could ride, I could draw a gun fast. I just had all the things that worked for a Western for an actor to do.
You mentioned earlier you were in the military service. So what years were you in the military?
I got drafted during the Korean War. I turned 19. and that was 50. I was in the Army from 53 to 55, 17 months in Korea, 15 months in Korea, and a couple months in Japan. And then I got out of the Army in 55.
Now, I noticed on your website you have a part dedicated to wounded warriors. What do you do with wounded warriors?
Well, first of all, Jennifer and I support them tremendously, monetarily. And a couple of years ago, my wife Jennifer and I, and a very close friend of mine, Ken Stormer, here in Gainesville, who has he's an ex-wounded warrior himself, but he also teaches special service in the sheriff's department and the police department, all kinds of gun work. He has a great gun range and a ranch not too far from me. And we decided to do something for the warriors, and we invited, I believe, 15 of them and their wives for a weekend of shooting, and Jennifer and some girlfriends of hers to take the wives and all their children to the zoo in town. We have the Great Frank Buck Zoo here. And they had a marvelous time. And I went around in town. I got all the money to pay for the hotels, the food, the restaurant. Everybody contributed to support these people, and they had the time of their lives. And it was a great feeling for us to be able to do that for them, because they're fantastic people.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your service. But there's not enough being done for veterans in today's world. And I mean, I know a lot of people are doing a lot of good things, but there's still not enough being done.
Well, I'll tell you, Trump is doing the best he can.
Yeah, I'll go along with that one.
He's got the VA going in the right direction, and people got to do their job there, or they're gone. And so that's got to get people's attention. And he certainly supports the services 100%. So it's better than it has been. Let's put it that way. It can always get better.
Right. Enough is not being done. The guys, listen, I had a very easy in the service. 3 years out, no problems. But the guys today going back 1 year, home for a year, back for a year. That's a tough
terrible.
life.
Oh, it is. It really is. I know several of them that do those tours, and I'm so glad when they come home and say that's the last one. Thank God I'll see you alive finally. It's rough.
All right, I'm going to ask you one last question. Name some of the people you enjoyed working with that the audience may know. Joel McRae, for instance. I don't know. You were in his last film, weren't you?
Yeah, I did. My producer, who produced Laramie, and myself got Joel out of retirement to do that movie. And Mustang Country, which we shot up in Banff, Canada. Well, I certainly hope people know who he is. He was one of the biggest Western stars and stars, period. There wasn't anything that Joel couldn't do. He was certainly my idol. I patterned the way I rode a horse after him. Of course, I'll never ride a horse as good as he did, but I made an attempt to try and look as good as he does. And no, he was an idol of mine, 100%. So that was a thrill working with him. But I've worked with lots of great stars, throughout the years. The beautiful Rhonda Fleming, great redheaded actress, big movie star. Guested on Laramie. I've worked with Betty Davis. Robert Ryan guested on one of my Wagon trains. As I mentioned earlier, Charlie Bronson did a couple of Laramies. There was lots of very, very large stars at the time. They were paying a lot of money to get these movie stars to come and guest on TV. So we generally got a few pretty good ones.
Robert Fuller, listen, thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for your military service. Thank you for what you're doing for the veterans today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Great questions, and I enjoyed talking to you. Got some good stuff there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Same to you.